I was hired as a blind Mafia boss's assistant. I had no idea my one word would break him. They said no one had ever seen Gabriel Moretti flinch. Not when the bomb took his eyes 12 years ago. Not when they buried what was left of his wife in a closed casket. Not when he walked out of the hospital, 38 years old and blind, and told his men that pity was a weakness he would not tolerate under his roof. For 12 years he ruled his family through recorded reports, rigid routines, and a distrust so complete that even his own cousin measured every breath before he spoke. Then a 64-year-old widow named Evelyn Shaw walked into his office with a stack of dusty probate files and a pair of reading glasses hanging from a chain around her neck. She did not tremble. She did not whisper. She listened to him for 3 weeks, sorted his dead mother's papers, and then, one quiet Tuesday afternoon, she answered a question he had been afraid to ask for over a decade. One word, not shouted, not softened, just laid on his desk like a folded letter. And the strongest man on the eastern seaboard put both hands flat on the wood and forgot how to breathe. If a story about a broken man and the woman who refused to lie to him is the kind of thing you sit still for, do me a small favor before we go any further. Tap the like button and follow along. It helps stories like this one find the people who need them. Now let me take you back to the morning Evelyn first stepped into that building, because none of what happened next was supposed to happen at all. Evelyn Shaw had worked in the county probate office for 35 years. She had married her husband Harold at 22 and buried him at 62, and in the 2 years since, she had learned 2 hard truths. Grief did not send a bill, but everything else did. And a widow living on a probate clerk's pension in a 2-bedroom bungalow needed side work whenever it came. So when the temp agency called about a records assignment at a private estate, $90 an hour, 6-week minimum, she wrote down the address and did not ask questions. The girl on the phone did tell her that 4 other clerks had turned the job down in the last month, and that the last one had walked out on her first afternoon. Evelyn had asked why. The girl had said very carefully that the client was a difficult man who did not care for being managed. Evelyn had smiled at her kitchen wall and said that most of her clients had been dead, which made them extremely difficult to manage, and that she would take the job. The address turned out to be a converted brownstone off Chestnut Avenue, with a black iron gate, a doorman who did not smile, and a foyer that smelled of lemon polish and old money. A tall man in a gray suit met her at the elevator. He said his name was Marco. He did not offer his hand. He explained the rules while they rode up to the 3rd floor, and by the time the doors opened, Evelyn understood she had not been hired to sort a normal estate. She had read enough small-town newspapers over the years to know a certain kind of last name when she heard it. Moretti. The papers had used other words too over the years. Family, organization, interests. Evelyn had stood in the elevator and adjusted her reading glasses, and reminded herself that she was here to sort paper, not to judge the man who owned it, and that $90 an hour bought a great deal of professional discretion. Marco spoke in a low, patient voice, the way a nurse warns a family before opening a hospital room door. Mr. Moretti lost his sight 12 years ago. He does not like surprises. Speak only when spoken to. Do not move anything on his desk. Do not touch him. If he asks you to read a document, read it word for word. No summaries, no editorials, and whatever you do, do not offer sympathy. The last 4 assistants forgot that rule. 3 quit. 1 is still in therapy. Evelyn adjusted the strap of her handbag. I understand, she said. I am not here to be liked, young man. I am here to work. Marco studied her for a long moment. Something in her steady tone seemed to catch him off guard. He gave a small nod, almost respectful, and pressed his palm against the walnut door. Marco opened a heavy walnut door and stepped aside. The office beyond was long and hushed, with drawn linen curtains and a single lamp burning low on a wide desk. Behind that desk sat a man in his early 50s, dark hair going silver at the temples, a soft gray sweater over a white shirt, and a pair of eyes that looked directly at nothing. A slim walnut cane rested against his knee. He tilted his head half an inch when Evelyn crossed the threshold, and she felt him listening the way most people watched. You are older than the others, Gabriel Moretti said. His voice was low and even, the voice of a man who had never needed to raise it. The agency did not warn me. I am 64, Evelyn answered, setting her bag on the chair by the door. I have been sorting other people's paperwork since before you were shaving. If that is a problem, I can save us both the afternoon. A pause. The corner of his mouth did not move, but something behind his stillness shifted. Sit down, Mrs. Shaw. My mother left 42 boxes of family records in a room down the hall. I want them read, sorted, and summarized on paper. Nothing summarized aloud, nothing removed, nothing thrown away without my permission. Do you understand? I understand, Evelyn said. May I ask one question before I begin? His head tilted a half-inch to the right. You may ask. Do you want the truth in what I find, or only the parts of it you can already guess? He was silent for a long 5 seconds. Then he said, Mrs. Shaw, I have not been offered the whole truth about anything in 11 years. Bring me what you find, all of it. And that was how it began. The records room was cold and dim and stacked to the ceiling with the leavings of a life. Antonia Moretti had died the previous winter at 81, and no one had touched her private papers since. There were rent ledgers going back to 1968, letters tied with brown ribbon, baptism certificates, tax records, medical bills, and thick manila folders that smelled of cedar. Evelyn sat down at the small oak table in the middle of the room, put on her reading glasses, and began. By the end of the first week, she had cleared 4 boxes and started to notice things. Old Antonia had kept 2 sets of books. One was the ordinary set, the household accounts of a widow raising a son and burying a husband. The other was quieter, tucked between hymnals and cookbooks in unmarked envelopes. Small monthly withdrawals from an account Evelyn had never seen listed elsewhere. A trust called the Sant Angelo Fund. Payments beginning in the spring 12 years ago, and continuing every single month until the day Antonia died. Never large enough to raise a bank flag, never late. Every payment routed to a bookkeeper in Vermont on behalf of a person listed only by initials, S.V. Evelyn had seen tricks like this before, in the estates of small-town patriarchs who kept a second family in another county. She had learned, in 35 years, that the first rule of hidden money was that it always led somewhere a person did not want anyone to look. She poured herself a fresh cup of Gabriel's black coffee and kept reading. Evelyn wrote nothing down that first day. She had learned in 35 years of probate work that quiet money almost always had a name attached to it, and names had a way of belonging to somebody who did not want to be found. She finished her shift, went home, poured herself a small glass of sherry, and thought about her husband Harold. He had spent his last months hiding pain from her because he did not want her to worry. She had spent those same months hiding fear from him for the same reason. She had promised herself she would never protect anyone by lying to them again. The next morning, she asked Gabriel a careful question. She said, Your mother kept a private ledger, small monthly payments to a trust called Sant Angelo. Did she ever mention it to you? Gabriel was seated at his desk, his fingers resting lightly on a raised braille report. He did not move for a long moment. My mother handled her own charities, he said at last. She did not consult me. Continue. Evelyn understood 2 things from that answer. He did not know, and he did not want her to know that he did not know. 3 days later, she found the beneficiary's full name. A birth certificate folded into an envelope of Christmas cards, filed under nothing in particular. The certificate belonged to a girl named Sophia Vale, born on the 14th of June in a hospital in Providence, Rhode Island. Evelyn stared at that date until her reading glasses fogged. She had been sorting family birthday cards all week. She had seen the same date on a small card taped to the inside of Antonia's prayer book, in Antonia's own hand, beside a photograph of a dark-eyed little girl in a christening gown. Underneath the photograph, in blue ink, Antonia had written a single word. Sophia. Evelyn sat down slowly. Gabriel's wife Daniela and their 6-year-old daughter Sophia had died in a car bombing 12 years ago. She had read that fact in a newspaper clipping the day before. The daughter's birthday, according to the same clipping, had been the 14th of June. Now here was another Sophia, Same birthday, receiving money from Antonia's private account for the exact number of years since the bombing. Evelyn was a probate clerk. She had seen every kind of quiet crime. Her first instinct was fraud. Someone had been stealing from a grieving mother, using a dead child's identity to skim a family fortune. It was the ugliest and the likeliest explanation, and she almost believed it. Almost. Because Antonia Moretti had also left a small leather notebook tucked inside the same envelope. Inside the notebook, in the same careful handwriting, was a list of dates and doctor's visits, dental appointments, violin lessons, school report cards. No one commits fraud by keeping a record of a stranger's cavities. This was not theft. This was mothering. And it had been going on since the summer the bomb went off. Evelyn closed the notebook and set it on the table and put her hands flat on either side of it. For the first time in 35 years of probate work, she wished the paperwork had lied. Because if Antonia Moretti had spent 12 years quietly paying for violin lessons for a girl born on the 14th of June, then somewhere out in the world, wearing a name that was not her father's, was a child Gabriel Moretti had been grieving for no reason at all. She did not tell him. Not yet. She needed to be sure. A widow with 35 years in probate did not walk into a blind man's office and hand him a resurrection based on a birthday and a christening gown. So she went, on her Saturday off, to a small parish house outside the city, where Antonia's notebook had listed one recurring visitor, a retired priest named Father Michael Doran. Father Michael was 76 and mostly deaf in his left ear. He answered the door in a gray cardigan with soup on the collar, and looked at Evelyn the way a man looks at weather he has been expecting. "You are Antonia's clerk," he said before she had said a word. "She told me if anyone ever came asking, it would be a woman with kind eyes and a stubborn jaw. Sit down, Mrs. Shaw. I have been waiting for you for 11 years. He made tea with hands that shook slightly, and told her what he had helped Antonia do the night after the bombing. Daniela had died at the scene. Sophia, 6 years old, had been thrown clear of the car by the blast and found by a housekeeper who did not know who the child's father was. The housekeeper had called Antonia, not the police, because in that neighborhood people did. Antonia had gone to the hospital in a private car and stood over her granddaughter's bed at 3 in the morning and made a decision that Father Michael had helped her carry out. She had chosen to let Gabriel believe the child was gone. "Why?" Evelyn asked. Her voice was calmer than she felt. Father Michael turned the teacup between his palms. Because Antonia had already buried her husband to that life. She had watched her son come home from his father's funeral and take up the same phone with the same voice. She believed in her bones that if Sophia grew up inside that house, one of two things would happen. She would become part of it, or she would be killed by it. She chose a third door. She placed the child with a family she trusted, 3 states away, under the surname Vale. She paid for everything from her own accounts. She never told Gabriel. She said the truth would either bring him peace or bring him war, and she was not brave enough to guess which. Evelyn drove home slowly that evening. The road was wet, and the streetlights smeared across the windshield, and she thought about Harold again, and about the difference between kindness and cowardice. Antonia had loved her son. Antonia had also robbed him of 12 years. There was no clean word for what she had done. There was only what came next, and what came next was Evelyn's problem now. She sat at her kitchen table until well past midnight with the photograph of the little girl in the christening gown propped against the sugar bowl. She thought about what a mother owed a son, and what a grandmother owed a granddaughter, and what a hired clerk owed a blind man who had asked her, plainly, for the whole truth. In the end, there was only one honest answer, and she already knew it. She did not sleep. At 6 in the morning, she drove to the brownstone, let herself in with the code Marco had given her, and sat down in the office with the notebook, the birth certificate, and the photograph in a folder on her lap. Gabriel arrived at 7 as he did every day. He heard her breathing before he crossed the threshold. "You are here early, Mrs. Shaw." "Yes." "Why?" She stood. She had rehearsed 100 versions of this on the drive over. None of them fit, so she used none of them. "Mr. Moretti," she said, "I have found something in your mother's records. I have verified it as far as I can verify anything. I need you to sit down before I tell you what it is." He did not sit. He stood very still by the door with his hand on the frame. His voice, when it came, was quieter than she had ever heard it. "Mrs. Shaw, I have one question. Answer it plainly. No summary, no cushion, no kindness. Is my daughter dead?" The room got very small. Evelyn heard her own heartbeat in her ears. She thought about the folder on her lap and the 12 years he had carried in his chest, and the christening gown in the photograph. She opened her mouth and closed it, and opened it again. Alive. The cane slipped out of his hand and hit the rug without a sound. He did not shout. He did not curse. He walked, one careful step at a time, to the leather chair behind his desk, and he lowered himself into it, as if his knees had forgotten their job. He put both palms flat on the wood in front of him. He breathed in. He breathed out. He breathed in again, and this time the breath caught, and the man his enemies feared put his forehead down on his own desk and cried without making a single sound. 12 years of controlled grief came out of him in a silence that filled the whole room. Evelyn did not move. She did not go to him. She did not offer a hand or a tissue or a word. She simply stayed where she was, which was the only kindness she had left to give a man who had been lied to by everyone who loved him. She thought distantly of Harold in his hospital bed, and how he had once told her that the worst thing a person could do to another person was to decide on their behalf what news they were strong enough to hear. She had not fully understood him then. She understood him now. If this story has caught you the way it caught me the first time I heard it, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe. There is still a great deal left to tell, and the hardest part is not over. It is only beginning. When Gabriel finally lifted his head, his voice was raw and very slow. He asked her to tell him everything. She did. She told him about the account, the notebook, the christening gown, the priest, the housekeeper, and the small town in Vermont where the payments had gone. She told him about the surname Vale and the violin lessons, and the girl who, in a photograph Antonia had kept in a drawer, had her mother Daniela's mouth and her father's stubborn chin. She spoke for nearly an hour, and she did not soften a single detail. And when her voice began to give out, he asked her, quietly, to pour herself some water and start again from the christening gown. She did that too. She read from the notebook. She read the dates of the school report cards. She read the small notation, in Antonia's hand, that Sophia had been afraid of thunderstorms until she was 10. Gabriel listened without interrupting. When she was done, he said only one thing. "My mother thought I would ruin her." Evelyn did not answer that. She had spent her whole life reading wills, and she had learned that the dead never explained themselves, and the living had to build the explanation on their own. She let him sit with it. After a long while, he asked her to open the middle drawer of his desk and take out a small metal box. Inside the box was Daniela's wedding ring, wrapped in a square of pale blue silk. Gabriel touched it once with the tips of his fingers. He did not lift it. He asked her to close the box again. Then he asked her to read him the notebook, page by page, in Antonia's own hand. She did. And when she reached the last page, dated the week before Antonia died, she read the final line aloud. "If he ever asks, tell him I was afraid I was right about him. Tell him I would very much like to have been wrong." Gabriel closed his hand slowly on the edge of the desk. He did not weep again. Something harder replaced it. "Mrs. Shaw," he said, "I want to meet my daughter. But before I do, I want to know why my mother's private accounts have been accessed twice in the last 6 months by someone who is not me and not dead. Find that for me." That was how Evelyn discovered the second story, the one that had been hiding underneath the first one. Antonia had died in November. In January, someone with legitimate access to family probate had pulled the Sant'Angelo file. In March, that same person had pulled Sophia's school address and the name of her guardians. Evelyn traced the internal footprints the way she had traced 1,000 insurance claims, and every trail led to the same office on the second floor of the same building. Renato Moretti, Gabriel's cousin, his underboss. The man who lit his cigarettes with a silver Zippo lighter that snapped shut with a sound Gabriel could pick out of any room. Evelyn brought Gabriel the summary in a plain folder. She read it flat, no editorial. When she was done, Gabriel sat very still. Then he said, "Sophia turns 18 next Saturday. On her 18th birthday, the last of my mother's trust converts to her name. Legitimate assets, 2 funeral homes, a bakery chain, and the Providence real estate. She will control them the day the sun rises on her recital." Evelyn set the folder down. "And Renato has been running his own operations through those legitimate businesses for years." "Yes," Gabriel said. "If she signs the trust over to a guardian on her birthday, Renato keeps his cover forever. If she does not, he loses everything, including the years he has already stolen from it." Evelyn understood without being told. Renato had found Sophia 6 months ago. He had not told Gabriel. He was going to be at that recital, and he did not intend to leave without a signature. Gabriel stood up. His voice went to a place Evelyn had not heard before, quiet and iron cold. "I will take 6 men. I will walk in during the recital. I will put him against the wall in front of every guest, and I will make an example of him that this family will remember for another 12 years. Evelyn did not raise her voice. She said, "You will do no such thing." The room went very still. Somewhere in the hallway a clock ticked. Marco, on the other side of the door, later swore he had heard the exact moment Evelyn's chair scraped an inch closer to the desk. He had put his hand on his weapon and taken it right back off, because in his years with Gabriel Moretti, he had never once heard anyone tell the man no. And here was a widow, in a beige cardigan, doing it in a voice you would use to correct a grandchild. "Mr. Moretti," she said, "your daughter has been told for 12 years that her father is a dangerous man. She has been raised by kind guardians in a small town, and she is standing on a stage next Saturday to play the violin because your mother wanted her to have a life that had nothing to do with your world. If you walk into her recital with 6 armed men and drag your cousin out by his collar, you will prove to that girl, in front of everyone she loves, that every warning she was ever given about you was true. You will get your revenge, and you will lose her forever, on the same night. Is that the trade you want?" He did not answer for a long time. When he did, his voice had changed. "Then what do we do, Mrs. Shaw?" She said, "We let Renato walk into a room he thinks is empty. We let him say every word out loud. And we let your own men hear him say it, in his own voice, before you ever raise your hand." She paused, and then she added the part that mattered most. "Your daughter does not need to see you rescue her. She needs to see that you did not have to. There is a difference. It is the whole difference between the father she has and the father she has been afraid of. And we are only going to get one chance to show her which one you are." Gabriel sat down slowly. He put his hand flat on the desk. He said, "Draw it for me, from the beginning." Between them, over the next 4 days, they built it. Evelyn found a rehearsal room off the main hall of the conservatory in Providence, a small carpeted room with a single upright piano and a house microphone wired into the building's audio system for teachers to record lessons. She routed that microphone quietly, through a favor from a probate colleague who did courtroom sound for the county, into a private feed. Gabriel's 4 most senior captains would be seated in a back office 2 blocks away, listening live. Then they baited the hook. Evelyn placed a false document into a file she knew Renato had been quietly pulling. The document stated that Sophia would sign the trust conversion in the rehearsal room, alone with the family lawyer, 20 minutes after her recital. The family lawyer, in reality, was going to be sitting with Gabriel in a car outside, and Sophia had not yet been told anything at all. Evelyn refused, flatly, to let Gabriel approach the girl before the trap was closed. "She meets you," Evelyn said, "after she is safe, not before, and she meets you as a father, not as a rescue. Do you understand me?" Gabriel understood. He did not like it. He agreed anyway. Saturday came in gray and cold. The conservatory was a small stone building on a side street, warm and full of parents in wool coats and grandmothers with programs folded in their laps. Evelyn sat in the 3rd row on the aisle, in a navy dress that had belonged to her sister, with a small earpiece hidden under her hair. She saw the girl walk out onto the stage and her breath caught in a way it had not caught in years. Sophia was tall for 18. She had dark hair pinned back with a plain silver clip, and a face that looked, from that distance, like a photograph Evelyn had held in a folder a week earlier. She lifted her violin, and she played a piece by Mendelssohn that Evelyn did not know the name of, and Evelyn thought, for the whole 8 minutes, about a woman named Daniela she had never met. 2 blocks away, in a small car parked under a broken street lamp, Gabriel Moretti sat in the back seat with his head tilted toward the driver's radio, listening to a live feed of his daughter's violin for the first time in his life. He did not speak for the entire piece. When she finished and the small applause rose from the audio channel, he pressed his hand flat against the window glass, once, and pulled it back. Marco, at the wheel, pretended not to see. Before I tell you what happened in that rehearsal room, I want to ask you something honestly. If you were Evelyn, standing in the 3rd row, watching a girl play a violin for a father she has never known was alive, would you have told her the truth before the recital or after? Leave a word in the comments. I read them. The applause ended. Sophia bowed. She slipped backstage. Evelyn moved. She waited 3 minutes and then stepped into the corridor and knocked on the rehearsal room door. Sophia opened it. Evelyn spoke quietly and quickly. My name is Evelyn Shaw. I work for a man named Gabriel Moretti. He is your father. He is alive. He has not always known you were alive. There is a man on his way here right now who intends to make you sign papers that will hurt you. I need you to sit at this piano and pretend you are alone, and let him say what he came to say. My friends and I are listening. When he is done, my people will come through that door. I will not lie to you about any of this. Will you help me? Sophia stared at her for a full 10 seconds. Then she said, My grandmother in Vermont told me last spring that when a woman with kind eyes came to my door, I should listen to her. Evelyn had to sit down for a moment on the piano bench. Then Sophia sat down beside her and said very calmly, Tell me what to do. 2 minutes later, Renato walked in. He was tall and polished and smelled of expensive cologne, and he was carrying a leather folio and a fountain pen, and he was alone. He closed the door softly behind him. He did not see Evelyn because Evelyn was in the small closet at the back of the room with the door open a crack. He set the folio on the piano. He smiled at Sophia the way a man smiles at a child he has never bothered to know. He opened the folio. He said, Miss Vale, my name is Renato Moretti. I represent your late grandmother's estate. There is a matter, unfortunately, that cannot wait. He talked for nearly 6 minutes. He explained, in a warm and steady voice, that a great deal of money had been left in her name by mistake, that her guardians could face legal exposure if she did not sign it back to the family, that her father, whom she had never met, was a violent and unwell man who would use those assets to hurt people if she did not act quickly. He said that Antonia had wanted this in her final days. He said all of it into a microphone he did not know was live. 2 blocks away, in a back office above a butcher shop, 4 captains sat with their hands flat on a table and did not speak. Sophia did the bravest thing Evelyn had ever seen an 18-year-old do. She said, May I read it first, sir? And she took the fountain pen in her right hand, and she held it above the page, and she did not sign. And she asked him small, careful questions, and let him answer every one of them. She kept him talking until every last piece of him was on the tape. Then Renato's patience ran thin. He reached inside his coat. The silver lighter came out with his hand, an old nervous habit, and he snapped it open and closed, 3 times while he said, Miss Vale, I am afraid I am going to have to insist. That was the sound Gabriel had been waiting for. In the car outside, his head lifted half an inch. He knew where his cousin was standing. He knew which side of the room. He nodded once, and Marco opened the car door. They did not come in shouting. They came in quietly, the way men come into a room they have already won. Marco first, then 2 others, then Gabriel with his cane. Renato turned. His face did not change for a full second, and then it did, and the silver lighter clicked shut for the last time. Gabriel walked to the center of the small carpeted room, He stopped 4 feet from his cousin. "Renato," he said, "my daughter is behind you. Step away from the piano. Do not turn around." Renato stepped away from the piano. His hand moved, once, toward his coat, and Marco was on it before the fabric shifted. There was no gunfire. There was no shouting. There was only Gabriel standing very straight, with a girl he had grieved for 12 years 3 feet behind him, and a cousin who had lied to him for 6 months 3 feet in front. He could have said one word and Renato would not have walked out of that room. Every man there knew it. Renato knew it best. Gabriel turned his head just slightly toward the piano. He said, "Sophia." His voice broke on the second syllable and he steadied it. "I am not going to ask you to know me tonight. I am going to ask you to walk out of this room with Mrs. Shaw and let me handle the rest of this in a way you will never have to see. If you never want to see me again after tonight, I will accept that. But I will not be the reason you saw a man die in front of you. Not tonight. Not ever." Evelyn stepped out of the closet. She held out her hand. Sophia took it. They walked out together, past Renato, past Marco, past Gabriel. Evelyn did not look at Gabriel as they passed. She squeezed his shoulder once and she felt him shake under her palm. The door closed behind them. Whatever happened in that room after that, Evelyn was told later, ended with Renato leaving the family, the assets, and the country alive. Gabriel had chosen, in the smallest and hardest way, not to become the man his daughter had been taught to fear. It was not a mercy Renato deserved. It was a mercy Gabriel needed, for reasons that had nothing to do with Renato at all. 3 months passed. Evelyn kept her job. Gabriel restructured the family so that the legitimate assets sat under a clean trust with an outside board, and he stepped back, quietly, from the parts of his life that he did not want his daughter's name attached to. He did not move Sophia to the brownstone. He did not send her to a private school. He did not put a car at her curb. He asked her, through Evelyn, if she would be willing to meet him once a week for coffee, in a small cafe on a public street in Providence, halfway between her town and his city. He said she could pick the day. She picked Wednesdays. On the first Wednesday, Evelyn drove him to the cafe. She sat 2 tables away and read a paperback and did not look up once. Sophia came in 15 minutes late, in a green coat, and she sat across from her father, and for the first 10 minutes she said almost nothing. Then she said, "Grandma sent me a Christmas card every year in her own handwriting, and she signed it Antonia. I thought she was a friend of my mother's." Gabriel folded his hands around his coffee cup. He said, "She was your grandmother. She loved you very much. She loved me too, in a way that was very hard for her, and I am not going to speak against her in this room or any other. If you want to know her, I will tell you what I know. If you do not, I will not bring her up again." Sophia looked at him for a long time. Then she said, "I will think about it." That was all. Evelyn drove him home in the dark. He did not speak for most of the ride. When they were almost back, he said, "Mrs. Shaw, do you think she will come back next Wednesday?" Evelyn did not lie to him. She never would again. She said, "She chose the next meeting. Start there." Gabriel nodded slowly. "Before I let you go, I want to ask one small thing. If Evelyn's steady, unglamorous kind of courage is the kind of story you would like to see more of, tap the like button and subscribe. There are thousands of quiet women out there whose stories deserve to be told, and every follow helps me tell one more." That night, when they got back to the brownstone, Evelyn set a small cassette on his desk. Sophia had made it as a thank you gift. It was a recording of the Mendelssohn from the recital. Gabriel found it with his fingertips. He asked Evelyn to set the player beside his chair and to leave the tape cued to the first movement. She did. She turned off the desk lamp and gathered her coat and her handbag, and at the door she paused, because she had one more thing to say and she did not want to say it in a room with the lights on. "Mr. Moretti," she said, "I was married for 40 years to a man I loved. In his last months, I spent every day handling his bills and his medicines and his insurance claims. I told myself I was being useful. I was not. I was being afraid. I have thought about it every day since. I do not know if your daughter will come back next Wednesday. I do know that if she does, She will not need a boss or a soldier or a man with 6 cars. She will need a father who can sit still in a cafe and let her be late without punishing anyone for it. You already did the hard part tonight. You let her walk out of a room. Now let her walk back in on her own time. She closed the door. She heard, through the wood, the soft click of the cassette player. She heard the first notes of the violin. She heard the sound of a man who had ruled a family through recorded reports and rigid routines and absolute distrust, sitting alone in the dark, listening to his daughter play, not as a mafia boss recovering an heir, but as a father learning how to wait. Evelyn Shaw walked down the stairs and out into the cold Providence night. She did not cry until she reached her car. Then she cried the way she had not let herself cry for Harold, quietly and without shame. And she drove home along wet streets, and she slept, for the first time in 2 years, all the way through the night.